Oh, yeah.
I think 30 years back, right, our fearless leader, Gordon Moore, right? I say ours because Intel Run is still in me. Made things very simple by making the Moore's law, right? Everybody understood very easily, 18 months, 1.5. Now this with all terminology of Intel 7, Tsmc 5, I think it's getting very confusing. What is the what is the reason for Intel to make things so complicated now to understand what node is what, right?
Yeah. So, by the way, people say Moore's law, like, Gordon woke up and, came down the mountain and profused this stuff and all. Actually, if anyone has a calculator, okay, do 1.01 to the power of 72. 1.01 to the power of 72 is actually the Moore's law. That is 2x. Okay? 72 is 72 weeks. Okay? So if you pick any problem, and you persist on the problem, and you set a goal of an average 1% improvement. By the way, this applies to goals in your life as well, right? Just 1%. 1% sounds easy, right? It's like, I'm 200 pounds and 1%, can I lose 0.5 pounds every week, right? If I'm disciplined and if my scale collaborates, seems easy, right? It compounds. Moore's law is compounding, law. And the issue is, actually, we are off Moore's law a long time ago, the whole industry, right? Because the iteration time during Gordon's time, in a week, you run an experiment, in a week you got the result of that experiment, and you set yourself up for the next week, okay? Now it's a 3-month cycle. That's my fastest loop is 3 months on the advanced process technology. So now you run, 3 months is how many weeks, right? 12 weeks, right? So real Moore's law is running over 5-year cycle. Okay, so now we've been a little faking the Moore's law by starting 5 years ahead, right? And running multiple process lines and all. And people who figured that out early, like our friends in Taiwan, have been doing this for a little while, especially, in the transition to FinFET and all. And when they noticed the complexity of the stack has increased, okay? And that's the power of open ecosystem, by the way, right? Because they got scale, they are able to afford to be able to run multiple teams in parallel, right? If you're one design, right, and you're stuck behind a serial process, you can't run the parallel stuff, right? So things get... Oh, yeah. No, I'm saying that, so then there is the node marketing. TSMC does marketing, Intel does marketing, and, the node names, what is a nanometer, right, in the metal stack got very confusing, right? You got each transistor that we produce is a combination of multiple nanometers, right? And I have Pushkar in the audience here. He's, the semiconductor physics expert. He can go into the gory details of that. So, the marketing, people are used to one simple name and all that stuff. So, the nomenclature is very confusing. That's why we switched to the angstrom nomenclature from nanometer, because, now it's less than 1 and you can't call it 0.1 nanometer and all that stuff. So, I think that's another conversation.
Sorry. The next, sorry about that, because it's already 15 minutes late, and we have other speakers already ready on the virtual mode. Sorry for that, and thank you, sir. I think the question can be taken offline. He's agreed to take your question offline, sir. So don't bother. You can come and meet him. Okay? Yeah. Thank you. Well, in the interest of time, since all our speakers are all ready in the virtual mode, we have Dr. Shailesh Chittipeddi, Executive Vice President, General Manager of IoT and Infrastructure, along with Walden Rines, President and CEO of Konami, and also Sid Sheth, founder and CEO at D-Matrix. They're all ready, and their introductions are there on the screen. So since we are already behind schedule, I would like to straight away go over to the fireside chat on silicon-driven AI ML revolution. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So let me kind of set the stage, and then maybe I'll let Wally and Sid kind of chime in, share a few slides here, if you don't mind. Because we look at, well, Raja's talk is exciting. It's pretty much at the leading edge of the technology curve. And I'd like to talk a little bit about where the growth in semiconductors is actually going to be over the next several years. Hope you can see this slide that I'm sharing with you. Just give me a minute, and I'll be with you. Share, where did share go? Here we go. Okay. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, so if you look at it, right, the growth for semiconductors related to artificial intelligence is expected to actually be 5 times greater than the growth of the remainder of the market. And although it's coming off a very small base, we expect there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunities for companies that are competing in this area, right? As a matter of fact, today, India's AI market, based on IDC study, is expected to reach about $7.8 billion by 2025. And interestingly enough, there's a study done by McKinsey which talks about what happens across the regions. The AI adoption rate is actually highest at the Indian companies, right? And a large part of this was the approach that the Indian government took with the Digital India standard that was driven down. And the 4 major areas that there's been a good bit of focus on was one on schools, second on healthcare, primarily related more to the IT side of things. And I'll talk a little bit more later during this presentation about why edge AI and endpoint AI is probably far more interesting than actually focusing on the cloud aspects of it alone. The other side is the aviation industry is sort of focused on fleet management. And then the customer experience side, where the customer sentiment and things of that nature are being measured, right? So those are the important elements of what's driving growth. But let me just move to the next slide, which is actually far more interesting from my perspective. And I wonder why this is not moving to the next slide. Okay, I went too far down the line. Okay, so if you look at this now, right, and you look at the AI market dynamics, intelligence is actually moving much more towards the edge. While the core and the data center will continue to be important, which is primarily focused on training algorithms, the inferencing becomes a 10x over training algorithms when it comes to importance. And interestingly enough, the power domain is not towards the high power side, but at the sub 5 watt power domain. That's where most of the growth is actually going to occur in this space. And further, right, the edge is going to be more than 2.5 times the growth on the enterprise side of the business. So typically when you talk about edge AI or endpoint AI, it's really about embedded applications applying a pre-trained model to a specific task. That's the generic use case. And I kind of wanted to set the stage on what's happening in the AI world. And I'll kind of turn it over to Wally and Sid to talk a little bit more about their respective views on the subject. So Wally, do you want to take over?
Okay, I've become deeply involved in this part of the market in recent times through our company. And let me see if I can, you'll have to stop sharing.
I'll stop sharing, yep. Done, yep, there you go, Wally.
Okay, see if I can get on here. When last time I spoke in India, I was still CEO of Mentor Graphics, which had become Siemens EDA, and I was doing some work for the design for the defense or for DARPA for the U.S. And they asked me to look into fully homomorphic encryption, and I did. I surveyed all the companies that would be involved. because the US has correctly concluded that with quantum computing, once we get past 1,000 qubits, essentially all of the security on the internet can be broken. So we have to move to the next stage, and that next stage already has been designated will be fully homomorphic encryption. But all of the companies I talked to said this is decades away because it requires so much computation. And it was then that I ran into an old friend, Gordy Campbell, founder of Chips and Technologies and 3DFX and Soft Machines and others. And Gordy was working on a software company that had developed compiler technology to compile applications into totally independent streams of control and data. And that company was called Konami, for a tsunami of cores. And the reason was that after 7 years of development of the software, they found that traditional von Neumann architectures cannot run independently. And so the whole problem of parallelism with multiple cores is there's too much interdependence, there's shared memory, there's synchronization. You have to have totally independent streams of control and data. So Konami, after 7 years of developing compiler software, then decided to develop a chip and then a compute fabric where you connect multiple chips together, multiple servers, and achieve performance that's linearly scalable with the number of cores. And that's what Konami does. Now, of course, you can use this for machine learning, artificial intelligence, particularly good for inferencing and getting orders of magnitude higher performance than what we achieve today with NVIDIA servers. But if you want to really change the world, you do something like fully homomorphic encryption, which then changes every server in the world, because at the same cost, if you want secure information versus insecure, why wouldn't you take the secure? And the way it impacts machine learning, among other things, is that you can take encrypted data and build machine learning models without ever decrypting the data. So people are very concerned about their medical data or other things, and they're able to, they don't have to ever disclose it. It can be maintained in encrypted form. You make encrypted queries to an encrypted model and get encrypted results. No one ever sees the actual data. And so fully homomorphic encryption, I believe, will revolutionize the world. The client has his or her data. They encrypt it, send it to the cloud. Processing is done while it remains encrypted. No one has a key, no one ever sees the plain text data, and the results are sent back in encrypted form. And so the part that I'm involved in, similar to the kinds of things that you're working on, is based on doing a chip to implement that software, a chip that's made up of dynamically programmable cores, which can be put together and dynamically reconfigured under software, and which can then be put together in chips, boards, and servers, and provide performance that is orders of magnitude greater than what you could get with an NVIDIA server or Intel processors, and take us to the next level of compute, the next level of machine learning inference and capability. And it's something that's not years away. It's something that's very close.
Sid?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is great to, first of all, be here, and the opportunity that has been given to D-Matrix to present. What I thought is I'll share a few slides, and I'm glad to see this emphasis on inference today, because that is exactly what we are doing. And I totally agree with how Sailesh started out the panel when he said, how do you build a computing platform that can scale from cloud to edge? Because workloads are over time going to transition away from the cloud to the edge. So let me share a few slides here and tell you a little bit about what we are doing at D-Matrix. And let me know when you can see these. So yeah, I mean, we are a relatively newer company compared to obviously Renesas and Konami also. We've been in business for 3 years. So thought I'll just share a little bit about the company. We are really focused on building a very disruptive AI compute platform for data center inference to begin with. And when we say data centers, people typically club cloud as data centers. We are doing both cloud and edge data centers. So this could be a micro data center that is a smaller compute node sitting, servicing 5G subscribers, or could be, servicing an enterprise user base, right? So we are really kind of building something that augments CPU inferencing. So most of inferencing today is run on CPU. So we are building a computing platform that augments that CPU inferencing, building dedicated hardware, dedicated silicon that would sit inside a server for data center inference. The company just closed a Series A round led by Playground Global, Microsoft, SK Hynix, amongst other people, and is about 50 people strong, based in Silicon Valley. And we're very excited that we opened an office in Bangalore recently. So we are looking to ramp that team, and we are very committed to that location. So anyone who is interested, please do reach out. We'd love to speak with you. But the core innovation at D-Matrix is really something that we call in-memory compute. And in-memory compute is something that is very, very well suited for inferencing applications, specifically matrix math acceleration. When people talk about in-memory compute, there's different flavors of in-memory compute. What we are doing is we are building an SRAM-based in-memory computing engine. So this is on-chip in-memory compute. It is fully digital. Again, the tendency when people think of in-memory is that there is some level of mixed signal analog compute involved. This is a truly digital engine, and it is as accurate as a traditional digital accelerator. So what we have really done is marry the accuracy and predictability of digital compute with the efficiency of in-memory compute. And we call this a digital in-memory computing engine. And it really kind of helps us break through what we call the AI barrier, or how do we kind of co-locate compute and memory, and that's how we get a massive boost in efficiency to do data center inference. The other thing that a lot of you folks who are following what's happening with AI workloads specifically, transformers are essentially taking over the world, right? Transformers was a workload that was invented by Google researchers in 2017. They published that research. It was initially targeted for natural language processing and understanding. Since then, this stuff has essentially taken over a lot of different applications, from search to content moderation to conversational AI agents, document processing, et cetera, and it is expected to take over vision and video. So the first 4 years of AI compute was a lot about convolutional AI, but now we are moving into the age of transformer AI. And at D-Matrix, we are really building a clean slate computing platform targeted for transformer AI, because that is really going to be with us for the next 5 to 10 years. And really that's where most of the compute emphasis is going to be. And in terms of, I'm sure you've heard a lot about chiplets at the conference. You've heard a lot about open source. And this is where I'd like to touch upon the theme that Shailesh originally started with, is how do you build something that can transcend all the way from cloud data centers all the way to edge data centers, and even into micro edge data centers, potentially client compute, right? And chiplet-based computing platforms really offer you that flexibility, which is what we are doing at D-Matrix. Really, we don't believe in building massive, big chips that really need to be fit into a single application, but really building smaller chips, building a fabric of those chips. And you can really scale these. You can build, solutions with 1 chiplet, 2 chiplets, 4 chiplets, 8 chiplets. And depending on the need of the application, you can do both scale up and scale out. And you can really go after, multiple different markets, whether it's edge or cloud, depending on the compute needs of the application. So that is how we are approaching the problem at D-Matrix, all the way from IP to chiplets to cards to systems, and really kind of giving us that flexibility, modularity, and scalability across applications. But with that, turn it back to Shailesh, and we can take more questions or continue the dialogue.
Yeah. So let me share one more slide here from my piece of it, if I can. And I just want to set the stage for the teams that are listening in, because the interesting thing in this arena, right, is people focus primarily, if you will, on the training algorithm side of the business. And actually, if you look at it, some of the biggest opportunities that lie in India are in other verticals. They are in smart home, in things like healthcare, in things like industrial automation, building automation, and energy management, right? And I'll give you a very simple couple of very simple statistics which are very relevant when it comes to the healthcare sector. Like 1 in 11 Indians, for example, right, suffers from diabetes. 30% suffer from hypertension. 45 million from heart problems, and stunningly, right, 10% of the respiratory deaths are chronic because of pollution problems that occur there. And that's are some of the biggest challenges. So if you think about how sensors and AI can help, there is technologies out there today that can detect the advent of a cardiac problem before it occurs. There are solutions out there today that you can use for blood pressure patches and so on that rely on AI technology for basically making a difference to people's quality of life. Other area that's hugely important for India, for example, is things like traffic fatalities, right? In 2019, there were close to 151,000 traffic fatalities that occur. But if you think about the advent of what's happening on autonomous vehicles and ADAS systems, that's an example of what's happening on the edge AI front that is making a difference in people's lives. Same thing when it comes to air quality, right? 63 out of the 100 cities in India were amongst the most polluted when it came to air quality. And again, with things like PM 2.5 monitoring, soil monitoring, all these are things that can be remotely tackled, and using AI have the ability to attack the problem at hand. And I'll leave you with one more thought before I turn it back to the panel here again. When you think about the complexity of voice recognition, with 1.3 billion people that India has, right, and 22 plus different languages, when you compare it with the capabilities that we should be having on that front versus China, we really have some room to go for improvement in that particular area. So I just want to seed some thoughts in the kinds of things that India should be thinking about on the AI perspective as we move forward. And I'll turn it back over to my panel here for any further comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. Ollie?
Yeah, I would just like to add one comment, Sailesh. I mean, I would totally agree with that, right? I mean, the sensor data and the amount of information that is collected by end sensor nodes, right, is eventually going to need to be processed, right? And how close can you bring AI to the endpoints, right? And I think there is just a lot of silicon innovation that is going on in different areas that will allow for silicon to move closer and closer, or AI specifically to move closer, AI algorithms, AI compute to move closer and closer to the end nodes. This is something that has been missing. As you said, most of the processing has been happening in the cloud. It is going to be impossible to take all these multitude of endpoints and feed all that information into the cloud and then process it there, bring it back. Inferencing specifically does not need to be done that way. So, clearly over time, we see that processing moving closer to the endpoints, and how close to the endpoints can we go for more and more efficient processing is really something that is happening, and we are very excited about that.
So to Sid's point, moving to the edge becomes a critical part of all of the inferencing technology. One thing I find very interesting is that in the large investment that's been made in machine learning models, the protection of those models, the protection of the data has been minimal and has caused big problems. Tesla, for example, developed a very expensive machine learning model, which was then copied by their competitors. And if you look at the edge, to encrypt a machine learning model for automotive capabilities, it seems ridiculous because it has to run in real time. So how can you encrypt it and put the burden of that decryption? But if you could improve the performance by orders of magnitude, then you could have encrypted models. And if you can encrypt those models, then you can protect the value of the model you created. And if you can run at a sufficient speed, then you can run those models in encrypted form. And that's a big step forward from where we are today, and a capability that would then enormously increase the value of information, the ability of people who have information, who have valuable models, to protect those models so that others can get the benefit of using the models without ever seeing the plain text data.
I mean, actually, yeah, that's a pretty good point. And I mean, I think the opportunities, people focus so much on the training side of it, right, that they often forget what's happening on the other end, which is equally critical in terms of what's going on. So,
yeah, you train once, but you infer, n number of times, right?
Exactly. And I think as you know, if there was, I would say the one thing that from an India perspective, certainly Renaissance is investing quite a bit, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say we weren't doing that in India. We are growing our presence in Bangalore. We're partnered with Tata Elxsi for our next generation electric vehicle development. And there's multiple partnerships, especially from an IDH perspective, that we're working, because a lot of this sort of AI is application dependent. So if you don't have the ability to partner with somebody on the application front, you have your own set of challenges in terms of what happens there. So certainly we're doing a lot of that, but the opportunity in India is mostly, I would say, India should be thinking more about edge computing more than it does about the previous sets. I certainly think the data center presence will help, the server presence will help, but given the limitations on power, something to consider would be more along the lines of edge computing and what we can be done on that front. So.
Yeah, sorry for the intervention. The next 5 minutes, you need to conclude the fireside chat. Yeah, 5 minutes.
I mean, yeah, go ahead. I'll open it up to my panel. I don't want to be hogging up all the time.
I think if I may add a point here, I think there's one area that India can really make a big difference in the growth of AI and really as AI permeates through different applications, and we touched upon different applications. Really, the software. Software is as big a piece of AI compute as the hardware, right? So yes, this is a panel on silicon innovation, and there has been a lot of silicon innovation, has played a massive role in the proliferation of AI over the last 8 to 10 years. Really, the big bang of AI, as they call it, happened in 2012 with AlexNet, which was an image detection model, a computer vision model, right? And then after that, there has been a set of improvements. Hardware has improved, software has improved, but now it is time to really deploy this stuff. We go back to inference. Right, you can train all these models all you want, but it is time to deploy these models, monetize them, find use cases, applications, and that's where really software plays a very big role. There's so many different vertical applications. We touched upon many of those in the beginning of the panel, but how do you really take the information, make sure that it is used and monetized in an intelligent fashion based on the decisions that the hardware is making, is really where the software comes in, and making sure that it is easy to use. Users can really take the information, do something with it. A lot of the end user interfaces are really tied to the software. So I think India can really play a very big role in terms of making the software really user friendly for the target applications and the end users.
So I'd say we'd welcome questions from the audience. It's really refreshing. I see Satya Gupta, I see Ajit Manoka, all these people, we all haven't gotten together for so long. It's so great to all be back in a single conference. I hope the rest of us can join in the near future.
We'd like to open it up for questions, if there are any.
Yeah, there's a question. It's coming right away.
Hi, Wali. No question, but glad to see you and Sid and Salesh. Really, I wish you were here in person, and you would have really enjoyed the energy on this SemiconIndia 2022. But Wali, I was really impressed with the use of homomorphic encryption. So SEMI has been working actively with RPI to develop this data transfer model with encrypted homomorphic encryption. And I was intrigued with the amount of compute it needs. So when will it become practical that when we can easily transfer data without fear of somebody abusing the data? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think most people had felt that this was a long way away. I think it's going to happen very quickly. It'll happen with our company. It's going to happen from some other companies too. In order to run a computation on homomorphically encrypted data at the same rate as you would on plain text data. If you have the full range of computation, it's about 5 or 6 orders of magnitude performance. A single bit of information is encrypted into a 500-order polynomial with 64-bit floating point coefficients, and then to perform a logical operation requires thousands of fast Fourier transforms. That's a lot of computation. But the amazing part is there are at least half a dozen companies that believe they will add orders of magnitude to the performance, and we at Konami think we can solve the whole problem, certainly in the fairly near future, and then offer an alternative which is truly secure computing and which causes a really revolutionary change in the way data centers are managed, the way people do compute, the way data is protected, and the way data is sold and distributed, which I think will be very revolutionary.
Very good. I think in the interest of time, I want to invite 3 of you to Semicon West in July and have a follow-up discussion on this. Thank you very much.
I will be there, Ajit. I'm planning to go. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. With this, we come to the end of this fireside chat, and a sincere thanks to all the 3 participants. And now we have a fireside chat. It's a combo of, it's a hybrid fireside chat, physically as well as virtually. Physically, we have Shri Barun Datta from IMEC to kindly come over. Mr. Barun. Yeah, kindly come over. He's the chief scientist of IMEC Leuven, Belgium. Let's give a round of applause for Mr. Barun. And he leads and has led various R&D programs across the IMEC semiconductor R&D ecosystem. And the fireside chat will be with Sajeev Dalal, the Executive Vice President, Business Management, and is responsible for focusing and directing the TSMC's business development and sales strategy. So, Mr. Barun, Mr. Sajeev is also ready. It's over to you. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I guess this is going to be a slightly difficult session because we are following 3 great previous talks, and they've essentially taken everything we had to say. So Sajeev and I are going to improvise on the fly and try to do this as well as we can. Sajeev has been a long-term supporter of, through TSMC, of many of my fabulous initiatives, and TSMC and IMEC still have a very strong collaboration in promoting access to foundry services through all the SMEs and basically research institutes. That's something which is active, was started a long time ago in Europe, but has been very also recently more active in India. Sajeev has worked quite closely. And what we actually discussed a little bit, Sajeev, we'll have to, as we discussed, we'll have to improvise. So the best way I'm going to run this is, I will try to make, ask Sajeev a question, because Sajeev representing or knows the entire foundry ecosystem for the last, I don't know when. Sajeev and I go back, I think, to the early 2000s or even late 1990s. So we basically have been together for a long time. So knows the ecosystem very well, and he's been looking at emerging business for a long time.
So Mr. Datta, sorry for the intervention. Somebody has lost their right bracelet, a golden bracelet. So that's the reason, since it's a gold, this one. So if you have lost it, you need to identify. And Hema is here at the reception. Please check if any of you are wearing a gold bracelet. And amidst the semiconductor, there is a little bit of gold coming in now. So, right, but it's a lost one. So I'm sure the owner will get it. Yeah, back to you, sir.
So the session was titled Global Growth Drivers for the Foundry Ecosystem. So what I'm going to try to do is ask Sajeev a few questions and let him respond, and then I'll try to comment on them. And hopefully my comment is going to be intelligent and differentiated in what Sajeev says. So Sajeev, one of the things that you've been in this and have been focusing on the emerging markets or emerging new areas for foundry. From your perspective, what are still the key drivers for growth of this business going forward? I think we've all looked at the mobile and everything else over the last couple of years, but going forward in the Indian ecosystem, to give people a perspective, what do you think is something that you see as standing out Or what is it that you think you should be chasing?
Well, okay, so let's talk about it in two parts. The first part is the applications. The second part is sort of the technology trends that we see at TSMC. And I'd say that it's both for the major accounts as well as the startups driving innovation. So if you look at clearly digital transformation has come hard, accelerated everything. It's number of devices, content per devices. You've heard all of that, of course, over the course of yesterday and today. And it's been great. Actually, this opportunity is great. I should start with that because it's not often that I see Siva and Raja and Sailesh in the same morning or my evening. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. And okay, so let's get back again to what's driving TAM and content growth. What do we see at TSMC? Of course, everybody's talked about HPC, the 5G, 6G trends, IoT. But other emerging areas are also extremely important. We see a lot of activity in healthcare that is going to keep driving business forward. It's a great time to be in semiconductors. So now let's just talk just 1 second on a few minutes on the technology trends. Clearly, I think Raja talked about computing, energy efficient computing is driving things forward. The whole chiplet, and that represents a opportunity for India as well. Because as Raja talked about, there is 47 tiles. Not all tiles are made by the same company. There's a lot of mix and match. So again, there's an opportunity to be part of the tiles being made. There's high bandwidth, there's low power connectivity. But here's the most important thing I see, Varun, to go back to what you asked, which is, what are the opportunities for India? Well, if you look at the growth, it's not only the technologies that follow Moore's law. Every cell phone today requires power management devices. And there's my friends at Qualcomm can talk about how it's gone from 1 PMIC to 20 PMICs and even more. But if you look at where the silicon content is outpacing the capacity available, that's in mainstream technologies. And that's 28 nanometer and above. So again, a tremendous opportunity for India to think about, you don't have to follow Moore's law down that path. That's an expensive path. But there's a lot of other opportunities that are driven by technology trends. So, Barun, how do you see it from your end?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of insight. When I returned in 2010 to IMEC, IMEC till then was very much focused on supporting only, I would say, quite singularly, the Moore's Law activities in R&D. And I was crazy enough at that time to say that I'm going to spend at least 30% of my time on non-scaling technologies. I kicked off a gallium nitride program to go take it to 200 millimeter. I kicked off a program in imaging. I kicked off one of the earliest programs in trying to use silicon platform for genomics, and a program in neurotech. And believe it or not, they have actually grown faster than I ever thought in size, with a completely different set of customer base. They're much more application-driven customers. They're not really silicon folks. But translating from that, I got close to the automotive industry in Europe. And one of the things that I learned from that is that my personal belief, looking at it in the India context, because I think mobility, I don't like to talk about automotive, I like to talk about mobility, because automotive only thinks of cars, but there are, living in the Benelux, what I've realized is my major mode of transportation has changed from a car to a bicycle. Okay, you can say I've gone back 100 years, but it happens to be an electric bike, okay, which costs 8,000 euros, so it's not cheap. And this has got actually one of the strongest bases of gallium nitride power electronics. Infineon dominates in the supply of that. And to me, what is amazing is mobility, I think, is an option. Mobility applications are a huge opportunity, okay? And there is a local application source. The other important thing is, I think globally, we are pretty close to hitting the limits of total energy consumption. Okay, and you can figure out whether it's whether it's going to peak in the next 5 years or it's going to peak in the next 10 years, but we're getting close to it. So any thought of what I would say power management and conservation, okay, and the way I see it is that every single plug socket will have to become intelligent. Okay, and when I say this, when I say intelligent, it could be autonomous, it could be networked, but it'll have to be intelligence, and that is a huge amount of silicon. Okay, and it's quite likely that that won't be at anything more than 28 or might be 16 at the most, and most likely will need for power conversion and everything even bigger nodes running up to 40 or 65. So I do think that we shouldn't, my expectation is on the automotive side is that I wouldn't be surprised if there is 3x more total wafer consumption in automotive than we have today. And similarly, in the energy conservation side, or what I would call industrial electronics side. And I think these are quite application specific and localized, because every application in this thing is also a huge source for entrepreneurship. Okay, my good friends at Samsara who have built a platform are trying to integrate all sorts of sensors, and the challenges they have locally is just massive. So I think this is a huge driver for silicon. I think we are, sometimes don't look at it because, or in fact, I like the fact that the previous speakers talked about inference at the edge. I think inference on the edge is not taken as seriously because that's where the sensor is going to be or the controller is going to be. Okay, so I think this is something which could be pleasantly be much bigger than we think it is today. Today, this whole market, I mean, it's true that the two biggest analog and linear product companies in the world, that's Texas Instruments and ADI, are the two most profitable semiconductor companies in the world. They're running at gross margins running at close to 70%. But they together are 40 billion in size, of 35 billion in size. But I think that market somehow has the potential to be a hidden growth driver. That I think is something we should not ignore. So having made that comment, I would move on to talking about what do you think about the design ecosystem driving foundry? What do you see as the needs or drivers coming from that side?
Yeah, good question, Barun. I'll actually tell you a personal story. So I think Satya Gupta in the room or Venkat from Mastership will know, 15 years ago, I actually visited India to see, I led a team to see what the semiconductor landscape was. Wrote a report, went up to Morris Chang in Riksai, who was the CEO at that time, and said, I want to open an office in India. And we did. And the idea was to support the growing ecosystem of designers. And we opened an office in Bangalore, and I'll tell you, perhaps it was 15 years too early. Today, when I listen to everything that's being said, the dynamism, the excitement, I think it's from a TSMC perspective, I've got to go look at that again. But to answer the question, yes, we see that. I mean, the number of tape outs that come directly into Taiwan from India has gone up exponentially. It used to be 10 years ago, they would come through the multinational, just be, all the work was done in India. It would simply be branded as coming from the multinational as a tape out. Today, it comes directly. And that is such a, promising sign of things to come. I know everybody's talked about having 20% of the workforce, but I think in terms of the design ecosystem, I'd say one thing that's important for India to do. And that is local products. As we drive consumption, we've got to look beyond just the consumption part of it. Where are the local products that address the local needs? I think I'll just speak from a fab perspective or a TSMC perspective. We've always, it's been all about the customer, satisfying the customer. We follow the customer. If there is the local need, then fabs make absolute sense. So I think strengthening the design ecosystem, sort of get the change of thinking is we do service and we do service well. How about designing for our own products. So that's one thing. Now, what does that require? Of course, that requires our innovation, our startups. How do we support the startups? So I'm very encouraged to hear about how we support the startups. Of course, they need dollars, training. Now, I think, Barun, you and I talked about that we have been entrepreneurial by nature, right? I mean, a lot of us left India with 2 suitcases and $20 in our pockets and made our lives. So there is, just building on that trend, there is absolutely no reason why we couldn't have multiple startups driving semiconductor innovation. And then I think the manufacturing will come.
Right. I think just to counter that, I think sometimes we underestimate that today we still have to transit in India from thinking about marketplaces and services to a product engineering culture. And this is it's not such an easy thing, because the step up to product engineering is much more challenging. And I don't think it's a question of intellect. It's a question of attitude and culture. Okay, and I think this is a place where the type of coursework even we do in university, and I'll give you an example, a small example. What differentiates the coursework in some of the top schools in the US and in Europe in, let's say, analog design, is they actually not only try to do a PLL or an op-amp, but they tape it out and it gets back from the fab. And Sajeev knows this because they provide support in getting these 0.18 micron tiny ASICs back to the pair of 2 students, but they actually sit down and measure it. And this changes and builds a certain level of product confidence, which I think is absolutely essential. Okay, I think most of us who have been in the US and grown up in the US and grown up through the engineering stream have been product builders. And that's why we land up in startups, and especially the silicon people. Okay, might be a little less in the folks who went and built services. And this is something I think we need to pay a lot of attention to, because I think most of us went abroad to learn how to build product. We have to train our next generation to be able to build product in India. And I think this is a critical sense, because that's what's going to drive the design ecosystem and consumption of localized solutions. Okay, I always say that I'm always amazed at how many small companies in Germany make silicon products. You often don't realize them, but they're all localized solutions from, advanced regulators for plumbing to everything else, but they have their own ASICs in them. Okay, and they're not in an advanced node, but they do demand product engineering skills. Okay. Okay, so the question is, I would like to change from that to being a leading foundry, okay, in the India context. This is a loaded question, okay. What do you see at the needs of drivers for this ecosystem? What would your recommendation be, being a leading foundry to the government? What you think is missing so that you could grow your business? Let's put it in a generic question, because the answers that you give are also relevant to anybody else starting a foundry. Okay?
Okay. I mean, at the essence of it, we are a business. Business, it needs to be profitable. We need to hit our ROE goals. And again, this is a cliche, but we follow customers. And where, we look at different geographies, we've studied all of that. Clearly, our base has been Taiwan, but business needs will drive how fabs look at location, etc. Beyond that, I know when I got the minister's talk, etc., in the press conference, we're doing a lot of things on infrastructure. I also heard from other speakers, not only includes gases, etc., but even equipment. I mean, those are things. How quickly can you get replacements? Those are things that are important. Supply chain logistics, people, talent, you've talked about, Barun, and everybody else has. Very important, not only for the business end of supporting customers, whether they're internal to the same company with running that fab or external. and executing in the fab. And finally, again, this continuous stream of resources. And again, going back to the business end, any fab doesn't exist. It's not a standard chemical industry which just runs input and output. This is running a semiconductor fab is a complex operation. Products change on a yearly basis, 6-month basis, new standards. You've got to continuously tinker with the technology. So there's R&D money, there's product engineering money, there's resources you need to spend. So it's the talent. All these things together are the most critical things for any fab wanting to be successful. Now, I'll talk just a very little bit about what's made TSMC successful over the years, because it's somewhat relevant, right? And of course, you need financial strength and manufacturing. But we think there's three big pillars. And the first is, of course, the technology leadership. Now, technology leadership, again, as I said before, it's not only Moore's Law. It's all the differentiated technologies. And I think that's an opportunity for India. There is going to be a tremendous need for differentiated products using mainstream technologies. When I say mainstream, again, like you said, 16 FinFET and above, older technologies. So there's a wide range of technologies that can create products that are absolutely essential for the success of data centers, for AI, ML, all the wonderful things we talk about in high-performance computing couldn't be possible without companionships. So that's number one. Number two, capacity. But you need capacity that you build in a place. It's got to be effective capacity. It needs high yield, good quality, good reliability, good, so people can sleep at night. The third thing is customer trust. And I think that's one of the most important things that's made TSMC successful. In fact, Tom Friedman did an article not too long ago in the New York Times about what's made TSMC successful is simply one thing, which is trust. And it's structural trust. We don't compete with our customers, but there's execution trust. You know you'll get your product when you want it. But I think the most important thing, these are the three things TSMC controls. But Balwant, I'll say this, and this is very close to you. The most fundamental thing that has also made us successful is the ecosystem. That's the IP companies, the EDA, the DCAs, the VCAs, cloud, 100+ partners, just like IMEC, etc. And what do? They enable ease of design, optimize your products, and more important, offer differentiation. So time to market, of course, and we call it the Grand Alliance. So Balwant, now you can comment on that from your end, but that is absolutely the four things that are critical for any fab, or TSMC to be successful in this current time.
I think that's a very valuable comment, because I think for most people, if you look at it, it's not that TSMC has not had competition, but the thing is people have gravitated towards it. Okay, I think all of us have been designers at different types of this thing, and it's partly because they have essentially provided the most complete service, and in some sense made designers reduce the threshold of entry for many designers. Okay, it's to some extent why we go and shop at Amazon, right, or Flipkart, or anywhere. It's because it is the threshold, especially in the pandemic, the threshold of purchase was dramatically reduced. And this is something I think particularly in India we are very good at, providing a fantastic service. Okay, I think it's something that in general we have appreciated for a very long time. We might not always recognize it as such, but I think we are quite demanding customers. Okay, and so that demands very good service. So I think there is some cultural identity with providing good service, and that's something hopefully will translate that the foundries in India will be better service providers than anybody else can. And one last item I would say, which I think is critical, is the whole design enablement and models, which is becoming more and more complicated as the diversity of technologies occur. Okay, and I think this is something where, because there are more resources available in India on the technical side, it could be a very clear added advantage and support ecosystem which can accelerate access to the technology. So I think this is something which it is something which I think should be emphasized in this project. So in the interest of time, what do you have any? Because I would like to finish on time. It's 11:30. So do you have any closing comments, Sajeev?
I'll say we've talked about all the drivers. We've talked about, just as a recap, what we need. I think we need to be aware that there's some pitfalls. I don't have to look too far. I mean, clearly, for example, in China, there's at least 6 fab ventures where they invested billions of dollars that folded. And I think there's some lessons to study. So it isn't going first, just building a fab for fab's sake is something that can be done, but doing it the right way will be a more positive way and self-sustaining way. Now, can we do it? I mean, again, just on a personal note, my father built clean rooms across India, both for pharmaceuticals and for defense, for many, many years before he retired. Can be done well, and so I have no doubts that we could have the the ability to build fabs and run them without any problem. It's, again, let's look at the business proposition first before we go embark on a pretty expensive venture.
Okay, I mean, I think that's definitely, I think there's a lot we can learn from past mistakes. And one comment I would go on closing, this is the last comment I'll make before we close, is I think for the entire initiative in semiconductors, I think one thing which we can do a lot better in India than possibly any other ecosystem has done